Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we're going to be looking at an issue with neonatal incubators.
Yeah, it's really concerning.
You know, it's so important to keep those puppies and kittens nice and warm.
Oh, absolutely. Especially those really little guys, they can't thermoregulate.
Right. So we're going to be talking about a recent study that was actually sparked by a case in France.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. 3 French bulldog puppies that were delivered via C-section.
Okay.
They seemed healthy at birth, but then they died.
Oh, no.
Yeah. They died within 40 minutes of being put into an incubator.
Oh, wow.
And the incubator said that the temperature was 29.4 degrees Celsius.
That's a pretty normal temperature.
Yeah. Oh, they were so confused. But then they took a rectal temperature on one of the puppies.
Oh.
And it was over 42.8 degrees Celsius.
Oh, my gosh. That's a huge difference.
Yeah, that's a massive difference.
Sure.
So that's why they decided to look into this further.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so they took 5 different veterinary neonatal incubators
Okay.
from 2 different manufacturers. And they really tested them to see if the thermostat readings were actually matching up with what was going on inside.
So they were comparing the set temperature to the actual internal temperature.
Yeah, exactly.
And how did they measure the internal temperature?
They used thermocouples and infrared sensors.
Okay, so both contact and non-contact readings.
Right.
That's a good way to get a comprehensive picture.
Yeah. So they weren't just relying on the incubator's thermostat.
Right. It's like having a second opinion.
Exactly. So what did they find?
Well, the results were pretty concerning. 60% of the incubators they tested had temperature variations of more than 2 degrees Celsius from what the thermostat was saying.
Wow.
And in one case, the incubator's temperature was a whole 20 degrees Celsius higher than what the thermostat said.
Oh my gosh. That's horrifying.
It really shows how these incubators can malfunction.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier that even slight temperature fluctuations can be dangerous for these little guys.
Right.
So can you talk a bit more about the specific risks?
Sure. So with hypothermia, when their temperature drops too low, we start to see a lot of problems. Their heart rate slows down, their breathing becomes labored, they lose that suckle reflex, which is so important for them to eat.
Yeah.
Their blood sugar can plummet, and their digestive system can basically shut down.
Oh, wow.
And all of that can lead to multiple organ failure and death.
It's amazing how delicate they are.
It really is.
And what about hyperthermia? What happens when their temperature gets too high?
Well, that's equally dangerous. When a neonate's temperature gets too high, it can cause fluid buildup in their lungs, bleeding in multiple organs.
Oh, gosh.
And even death. And that's actually what they found in the puppies from that case in France.
Yeah, it's so sad.
The study also showed that some of the incubators were reaching temperatures above 41 degrees Celsius, which is known to be lethal for neonates.
Yeah. So we're dealing with a very small margin for error here.
Right. We need to be so careful.
These little guys are walking a tightrope between hypothermia and hyperthermia. And just a small inaccuracy in the incubator's temperature can be fatal.
That's the crux of the matter. We have to be aware of how fragile these neonates are.
Exactly. So what are the main takeaways for vets and breeders? What can we do to prevent these tragedies?
The biggest thing is that we can't just rely on the incubator's thermostat. This study has shown that those readings can be way off. We need to be using other tools like thermocouples and infrared sensors to double-check the incubator's thermostat.
So it's like having a backup system just to make sure everything is actually safe?
Exactly. And it's also about understanding how different incubator designs can affect the temperature.
Oh, that's interesting. So the type of incubator we use actually matters.
Absolutely. For example, some incubators just use heat from the top.
Okay.
And that can create hot spots, which can be dangerous for the neonates.
So it's not just about the thermostat.
Yeah.
It's about the whole setup.
Right. The substrate you use inside the incubator can also make a difference.
The substrate.
Yeah. Like some incubators have a rubber mat that absorbs heat, and others have a hard plastic bottom. And those materials absorb heat differently.
So we have to think about the heating method, the substrate, and even the neonate's position inside.
You got it. It's all connected.
It's like a puzzle.
And while those external monitoring tools are important, we can't forget about checking the neonate's rectal temperature.
Right. That's the gold standard. It tells us what's really going on inside.
Exactly. We can have all the fancy equipment, but if we're not checking their actual body temperature, we're missing a big piece.
It's about connecting the dots between the environment and what's happening inside the neonate.
Yeah. And of course, we can't just rely on numbers.
Right. We have to actually look at them, too.
Exactly. We need to be watching their breathing, looking for any signs of distress.
Like if they're breathing too fast or too shallow.
Right. Or if they're gasping, or if they seem lethargic or unresponsive.
Or even if they're too restless.
Exactly. All of those things can be signs that something's wrong.
And these little guys can't tell us what's bothering them.
Right. We have to be really observant.
So any change in their behavior could mean something is up.
That's the burning question. And remember, neonates are especially vulnerable to temperature changes.
Because they're so small.
Exactly. And they can't regulate their own body heat very well. So we have to monitor them constantly, especially in those first few hours after they're born.
Makes sense. So that's why the veterinarian in this study was checking the incubator.
But we can really break it down into a few key points. First, you've got to make sure your equipment is up to snuff. Don't just assume your incubator is working perfectly because it's new or it's been fine before.
So we need to calibrate and test everything.
Exactly. Even the incubator's thermostat.
Right. It's easy to just trust that things are working the way they should.
Yeah. But it's better to be safe than sorry.
Absolutely.
Huh?
So what else should we be doing?
You need to have a clear system in place for monitoring temperatures. How often are you checking the incubator? How often are you taking rectal temperatures? Make sure everyone on your team is on the same page.
Yeah, consistency is key.
Right. And if you're working with really delicate neonates, or if you've had problems with incubator temperatures in the past, you might want to go even further.
Like checking the incubator every 15 minutes with 2 different methods and taking rectal temperatures that often too.
Exactly. You're not going to hurt anything by being extra careful.
And of course, we can't forget about just looking at the neonates.
Yeah, you got to use your eyes and your instincts.
If something seems off, don't ignore it.
Absolutely. Better safe than sorry.
This has been a really informative deep dive. I think a lot of people might not realize how dangerous incubators can be if they're not used correctly.
It's true. They seem so safe, but there's a lot that can go wrong.
So we need to be vigilant.
Vigilant and informed.
And proactive.
Exactly. These little guys depend on us to keep them safe.
So to wrap things up, what are some concrete steps our listeners can take?
Well, first, like we said, audit your equipment, make sure everything is calibrated and working properly.
Number 1, check your tools.
Right. Number 2, set clear protocols for monitoring temperatures and make sure your whole team understands and follows those protocols.
Everyone needs to be on board.
Exactly. And number 3, don't underestimate the power of observation. Watch those neonates closely. Trust your instincts. If something seems off, don't hesitate to investigate.
So it's all about being proactive, informed, and vigilant.
That's the key. We can't just assume everything is fine. We need to be actively involved in their care.
Well said. This deep dive has really highlighted how important it is to take neonatal care seriously.
It is. It can be the difference between life and death for these fragile patients.
So to all our listeners out there, keep learning, keep asking questions, and never stop fighting for the well-being of these tiny creatures.
From Vet Neurojar, keep those minds inspired, hearts light and tails wagging.